The whip cracked like a gunshot next to Olivia Caldwell's ear. The splintered wood of the post exploded, stinging her cheek. But she didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. After 3 weeks tied up in this filthy stable, defiance was the only thing Joseph Blackburn hadn't stolen from her. And she'd die before she gave him the satisfaction. Montana Territory, 1878. The air smelled of spring, of new life. But all Olivia could smell was sweat, manure, and the rot of her own hope. Blackburn kept her tied to this beam all day, forcing her to mend his gear until her fingers were raw, bloody stumps. At night, he'd throw her in a dark storage closet with nothing but a ratty blanket and a bucket of filthy water. She was his slave, and no one was coming to help. "Faster!" Blackburn's voice was a low growl, like a wolf circling its prey. He loomed over her, his shadow a suffocating blanket. "Those saddles won't clean themselves." "Yes, sir," Olivia whispered, her eyes fixed on the leather. She scrubbed harder, the movement pulling at the ropes chafing her wrists. Just 6 months ago, she'd had a life, a father, a home. Then her father died, and she discovered he was in debt. Deep in debt to the cruelest man in the territory, Joseph Blackburn. He'd offered her a job as a housekeeper, a way to pay what was owed. It was a lie. The moment she set foot on his ranch, he'd locked her away, accusing her of theft. "You're lucky I'm a merciful man," Blackburn sneered, his grimy fingers reaching for her hair. "Most men would have you hanged. I'm giving you a chance to earn your keep." Olivia recoiled from his touch. "My father never owed you this much." The backhand was so fast she didn't see it coming. It sent her sprawling into the dirt, the taste of blood filling her mouth. "Your father was a fool," he spat. "And his daughter doesn't know when to keep her mouth shut." He straightened his vest, a smug look on his face. "No supper for you tonight. Let's see if an empty belly teaches you some respect." As he stomped out of the stable, Olivia fought back tears. Her father was no fool. She knew Blackburn had faked the debt papers. But with no money and no one to turn to, her word was worth less than the dust on the floor. She was alone. Utterly and completely alone. Or so she thought. A few minutes later, the stable door creaked open again. Olivia tensed, bracing for another blow. But the man silhouetted in the doorway wasn't Blackburn. He was taller, leaner, a stranger. "Blackburn wants his chestnut saddled," a deep voice cut through the silence. Olivia recognized him, one of the new hands hired for the spring cattle drive. She'd seen him from a distance, Xavier Zimmerman. He walked with a confidence that bordered on dangerous. "Yes, sir," she mumbled, struggling to her feet, the rope pulling her back toward the post. Xavier stepped into the dim light and she saw him clearly for the first time. He was covered in trail dust, his denim pants faded, his sleeves rolled up to reveal powerfully muscled forearms. A dark hat was pulled low, shadowing a strong jaw and eyes that missed nothing. His eyes swept the stable, then landed on the ropes around her wrists, and they narrowed. "What is this?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "Mr. Blackburn's orders," Olivia said, turning away from him. She didn't want his pity. Pity was useless, but Xavier didn't move towards the horse. He moved towards her. He crouched, his gaze fixed on the thick rope that bound her to the post. "How long has he kept you like this?" The genuine shock in his voice cracked the armor she'd built around her heart. 3 weeks, she whispered. He stood up slowly, every movement balanced and deliberate, like a man who was used to violence. "No one," he said, his voice hard as iron, "should be handled this way." Before she could answer, they heard footsteps approaching. Fast. Xavier moved in a blur, instantly positioning himself by the chestnut stall, pretending to check its hoof. One of Blackburn's loyal dogs, a man named Tim Miller, appeared in the doorway. "Zimmerman!" Miller barked, his eyes flicking to Olivia with contempt. "Boss wants to see you," The north fence is down. On my way, Xavier replied, his voice casual. But Olivia saw it. She saw his hand drift down, resting just inches from the revolver holstered at his hip. The movement was so slight, so practiced, Miller didn't even notice. When Miller was gone, Xavier turned back to her. His eyes were intense. Your name? Olivia Caldwell. Miss Caldwell, he said, tipping his hat. Have that chestnut ready in an hour. He emphasized the last two words, a strange intensity in his voice. Their eyes locked, and for the first time in weeks, a tiny spark of impossible hope ignited in Olivia's chest. 1 hour, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Then he turned and walked out of the stable, leaving Olivia with a racing heart and 100 unanswered questions. What was going to happen in 1 hour? For the next 60 minutes, Olivia worked like a woman possessed. She saddled the chestnut, her mind a whirlwind of fear and fragile hope. Was he planning something? Or was she just a desperate girl seeing meaning where there was none? At exactly the 1 hour mark, the stable door swung open. It was Xavier, and he wasn't alone. 2 other ranch hands followed him in, laughing and talking loudly about the cattle drive. They headed for the far stalls, completely ignoring her. Xavier walked toward her, his back to the other men. Stand up, he murmured. When I move to check the saddle, you slip out the side door. There's a woodpile. Wait for me there. Her heart hammered against her ribs. But the rope. In one fluid motion, a knife appeared in his hand. It seemed to come from nowhere. With a single expert slice, he severed the rope that held her. It fell away from her raw wrists. Count to 20, he hissed. Then go, and don't run. Before she could even whisper a thank you, he raised his voice, shouting to the other men. This cinch is loose. Blackburn would have broken his neck. He strode over to the chestnut, drawing the attention of the other 2 hands. Look at this! It's a miracle he hasn't been killed already. As the men crowded around the horse, arguing and inspecting the saddle, Olivia counted. 1, 2, 3. Her legs were trembling. 10, 11, 12. Her breath hitched in her throat. 19, 20. Now. She slipped out the side door, her body moving on pure adrenaline. The afternoon sun was blinding. She kept her head down, hugging the side of the stable until she reached the woodpile. She dove behind it, her lungs burning, and waited. The minutes crawled by. Each one felt like an eternity. Had it been a trick? Was he just toying with her? The thought sent a jolt of ice through her veins. What if he'd been caught? What if Blackburn was torturing him right now because of her? Just as panic began to set in, she heard the whisper-soft sound of footsteps. She tensed, ready to bolt. Miss Caldwell. It was Xavier's voice, low and urgent. Here, she breathed. He appeared at her side, leading a dappled gray mare. It was already saddled. He pressed a small cloth bundle into her hands. Food and water. Enough to get you to Mill Creek. There's a boarding house there run by a woman named Martha Wilson. Tell her Zav sent you. Olivia was stunned. Why? Why are you doing this? A muscle tightened in his jaw. Because what Blackburn is doing isn't just wrong. It's a sickness, and it needs to be cut out. He helped her onto the mare, his hands strong and sure on her waist. We don't have much time. Blackburn gets back from town at dusk. He handed her the reins. Follow the creek south for 5 miles. You'll see a big oak tree split by lightning. Turn west there. It'll take you to the main road. She looked down at this stranger who had just risked his life for her. What about you? What will you tell Blackburn? A grim smile touched his lips. I'll tell him the mare spooked and ran off. My job is to wrangle cattle, not chase after runaway horses. He stepped back. Don't worry about me. I can handle Joseph Blackburn. But something in his eyes told her it was more than that. This was personal. Thank you, she whispered, the words feeling impossibly small. Live free, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't place. That's all the thanks I need. He slapped the mare's flank. Now ride, and don't you dare look back. Olivia didn't need to be told twice. She urged the horse into a gallop, the wind whipping through her hair, the taste of freedom explosive on her tongue. The ranch disappeared behind her, but as she rode, a terrifying thought took root in her mind. Xavier wasn't just a simple cowboy. The way he moved, the knife, the cold look in his eyes, he was something else entirely. And she had no idea if he was a savior or a devil in disguise. The mare beneath her was a powerhouse, eating up the miles, putting more and more distance between Olivia and her prison. The sun began to dip below the Montana hills, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. She should have felt safe, but she didn't. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She followed Xavier's directions, sticking to the burbling creek. Her thoughts kept circling back to him. Who was he? What was he? Men didn't just risk their jobs, their lives, for a total stranger. There was a piece of the puzzle missing. A very large, very dangerous piece. As darkness fell, she reached the split oak. She turned west, urging the tired mare up a steep hill, and that's when she heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats. In the distance, coming up behind her, fast. Ice flooded her veins. Blackburn. He knew. Someone must have talked. Panic seized her. She was on an open hillside. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They would see her. They would catch her. They would drag her back to that hell. She made a split-second decision. She yanked the reins, pulling the mare off the trail and down into a dark, shallow ravine. She leaped from the saddle, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the reins to a juniper bush. She pressed her body against the horse, praying its gray coat would blend into the moonless night. The riders got closer, 3 of them. She could hear their voices now. Tracks lead this way. It was Tim Miller, Blackburn's lapdog. Spread out, another voice commanded, not Blackburn, his foreman, a man named Reed, who was twice as cruel. She can't be far. Olivia held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs so loudly she was sure they could hear it. The mare shifted, sensing her terror. Olivia stroked its neck, whispering silent pleas for it to stay quiet. Miller! Check that ravine! Reed shouted. Hoofbeats crunched on the gravel, coming straight towards her. This was it. It was over. In a last, desperate act, she fumbled for a rock and hurled it as far as she could into the trees on the other side of the ravine. It landed with a small clatter of dry leaves. Something's over there, Miller yelled. The hoofbeats veered away from her toward the sound. It was the only chance she would get. Ignoring everything Xavier had told her, she scrambled back onto the mare and kicked its sides, urging it up the far wall of the ravine. She plunged into the thick pine forest, away from the trail, away from her pursuers, riding blind into the suffocating darkness. She rode for hours, lost and terrified. When the mare finally stumbled from exhaustion, she knew they had to stop. She found a small, hidden clearing and dismounted. She ate a piece of jerky from Xavier's bundle, the dry meat like sawdust in her mouth. Sleep was impossible. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf, sent a jolt of terror through her. She dreamed of ropes and whips and Blackburn's mocking laughter. And through it all, she saw Xavier's eyes, cold and calculating as he cut her free. Had he set her up? Was this all part of some twisted game? Dawn finally broke. Stiff and sore, she climbed back on the mare and rode on. By mid-morning, she saw it, a dirt road snaking through the valley below, the road to Mill Creek. She was almost there. She allowed herself a tiny sliver of hope. Maybe she had made it. Maybe she was finally safe. The road curved around a hill, and her hope died in her throat. 3 riders were approaching. Her first instinct was to bolt, but it was too late. They'd already seen her. She pulled her hat low, her hand trembling as it hovered near the reins. These weren't Blackburn's men. But in this territory, strangers could be just as dangerous. As they drew closer, one of the riders, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, raised a hand. "Good day, traveler." Olivia's breath caught. A woman. "Good day," she croaked. The woman guided her horse alongside Olivia's. "My name is Martha Wilson," she said, her eyes taking in Olivia's torn clothes and haggard face. "You look like you've seen trouble." The name hit Olivia like a physical blow. Martha Wilson, the woman from the boarding house, the woman Xavier had sent her to. She almost fell out of her saddle. "Martha Wilson? From Mill Creek?" Martha's eyebrows shot up. "That's right. Do I know you?" "No," Olivia stammered, her mind reeling. "But a man sent me. Xavier Zimmerman." The moment she said his name, Martha's friendly expression vanished. It was replaced by something else. A sharp, assessing look. She gestured to the two men with her. "This is my brother Henry and my son William. You can speak freely." Hesitantly at first, then with a rush of words, Olivia told them everything: the fake debt, the captivity, the escape. As she spoke, Martha's face grew harder and harder until it looked like it was carved from stone. When Olivia finished, Martha exchanged a silent, meaningful glance with her brother. "Joseph Blackburn has bled this valley for too long," Martha said, her voice laced with cold fury. "The territorial marshal has been building a case, but no one's been brave enough to testify." "I'll testify," Olivia said, her own voice surprising her with its strength. "That's good to hear," Martha said, but then her eyes narrowed. "This man, Xavier, tall, dark hair, has a scar along his right forearm?" "Yes," Olivia confirmed, shocked. "You know him?" A strange, secretive smile played on Martha's lips. "He helped my family once, years ago." She paused. "Did he happen to mention why he was working for a man like Blackburn?" "No," Olivia admitted. "We didn't have much time." Martha just nodded, as if that was the answer she expected. It was clear she knew far more about the mysterious Xavier Zimmerman than she was letting on. And Olivia realized her ordeal wasn't just some random act of cruelty. She had stumbled into the middle of a war she didn't even know was being fought. They rode into Mill Creek, a bustling little town that felt like a different world after the isolation of the ranch. Martha led them to a large, welcoming boarding house. "You'll be safe here," she promised. Inside, the smell of baking bread and safety washed over Olivia. Martha sent for a hot bath and clean clothes, then turned to Olivia, her expression grim. "My brother and I are going to see Marshal Collins. He needs to hear your story. Immediately." Alone in the warm, clean bedroom, Olivia finally let the tears come. But as she sank into the steaming bath, a new fear crept in. Xavier wasn't just a kind drifter. Martha's reaction proved that. He was involved in something deep and dangerous. He hadn't just saved her, he had used her. But for what? Dressed in clean clothes, Olivia felt almost human again. Downstairs, she found William setting the table for supper. Before they could speak, the front door opened. Martha and her brother had returned, and they had brought the law with them. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped inside. "Miss Caldwell," Martha said, "this is Marshal Ethan Collins." Over a supper she could barely eat, Olivia told her story for the third time. The marshal listened, his eyes missing nothing. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "This matches other whispers we've heard. Blackburn is slippery. He targets people with no one to fight for them." He gestured to her raw wrists. "But this is proof." "What happens now?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sending a wire to the territorial judge," Collins explained. "With your sworn statement, we'll have a warrant for his arrest within days." He paused. "In the meantime, you stay here. You are a material witness, and you are in danger." Olivia's blood ran cold. "And Xavier Zimmerman?" When Blackburn finds out I'm gone, will he be hurt? A strange look passed between the marshal and Martha, a look of shared secret knowledge. Don't you worry about Mr. Zimmerman, the marshal said carefully. He's proven time and again that he can take care of himself. That night, lying in a real bed, sleep wouldn't come. Who was Xavier Zimmerman? A hero? A vigilante? A government agent? The marshal's words echoed in her head. He could take care of himself. It wasn't a comfort. It was a warning. 3 days later, the sound of a dozen horses thundering into town woke Olivia from a restless sleep. She rushed to the window. It was Marshal Collins, flanked by a posse of grim-faced deputies. Martha met them on the porch. The marshal's voice was loud and clear. "We've got the warrant. We ride for Crook Valley at dawn." The wait was agony. Olivia tried to help around the boarding house, but her mind was at the ranch. She imagined a shootout. She imagined blood in the dust. She imagined Xavier, caught in the middle of it all. Just before sunset, they returned. Olivia saw them from the parlor window. Marshal Collins and his men riding in a tight formation, and in the center, his hands bound in front of him, slumped in the saddle, was Joseph Blackburn. His face was a mask of fury. A dark bruise was spreading across his cheek. Behind him, several of his men, including Tim Miller, were also in chains. A cold wave of fear, not satisfaction, washed over her. It was real. She would have to face him in court. She would have to look that monster in the eye and tell the world what he had done. Martha came to stand beside her. "It's done, child. He can't hurt you anymore." "Was anyone hurt?" Olivia asked, her eyes scanning the riders, searching for a familiar face she knew wouldn't be there. "No serious injuries," Martha said. "Blackburn tried to make a run for it, but they cornered him in the barn. Most of his men gave up without a fight." "And Xavier Zimmerman?" Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper. A sly smile touched Martha's lips. "Funny you should ask. The marshal said Zimmerman wasn't there. Cleared out yesterday. Said Blackburn sent him on an urgent errand to Helena." An errand? Or had he simply finished what he came to do and vanished? Had he completed his mission? Before Olivia could even process the information, Marshal Collins was at the door, his face tired but triumphant. "He's in a cell, Miss Caldwell. The judge will be here in a week for the hearing." He then looked at her, his expression serious. "Tomorrow I need you to ride back to the ranch with me." Olivia flinched. "Why?" "We found papers in his safe, deeds, letters. We think some of them belong to your father. We need you to identify them." He paused. "And to identify the forgeries he used to steal your land." The thought of setting foot on that cursed ground again made her physically ill. But she knew she had to. She had to see this through to the end. That night, she stared out at the stars, whispering a prayer into the darkness, not for her own safety, but for the mysterious man who had set this avalanche in motion. The man who had used a knife, a horse, and a web of secrets to save her life, only to disappear like a ghost. Where was he? And what other secrets had he taken with him? The ride back to Crook Valley was surreal. The ranch, the site of her torture, looked deceptively peaceful in the morning sun. As they rode into the yard, the remaining cowboys stopped and stared. Some looked away, their faces etched with shame. They had watched her suffer every day and done nothing. The marshal led her into the main house. It was the first time she'd been inside. It was filled with expensive furniture and fine rugs, all bought with the blood and tears of his victims. In Blackburn's study, the marshal showed her a stack of documents recovered from the safe. Her hands trembled as she sifted through them, and then she saw it. Her father's elegant, familiar signature on the original deed to their family homestead. Letters from her mother, tied with a faded blue ribbon. It was all there. He hadn't just stolen her freedom, he'd stolen her entire history. "This," she said, her voice shaking with rage as she held up another document. "This is the loan agreement, the one he used against me." She pointed to the clumsy signature at the bottom. "That is not my father's handwriting. It's a forgery, a clumsy one." "This will seal his fate," the marshal said, taking the document carefully. As they prepared to leave, a shouting match erupted near the bunkhouse. It was Tim Miller, out on bail, arguing with another hand. "She's a liar," Miller screamed, pointing a finger at Olivia. "The boss was framed. She ran off on her own." "He helped Blackburn tie the ropes," Olivia said, her voice cold as ice. "He watched every day." The marshal's face hardened. "We'll take him in for intimidating a witness." As Collins strode toward the argument, Olivia's eyes scanned the corral one last time, and then she saw her. The dappled gray mare. The horse Xavier had given her. Someone must have found it wandering and brought it back. A sudden fierce wave of possessiveness washed over her. That horse was her key to freedom. It was a link to Xavier. "Marshal," she called out as he returned with a handcuffed Tim Miller. "That mare. She was given to me. She's mine." Collins looked from the horse to Olivia, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Take her," he said. "She's earned her keep." Riding away from Crook Valley, leading the gray mare, Olivia felt a weight lift. She had her father's papers. She had proof of Blackburn's crimes. She had survived. But as the ranch faded into the distance, a new, unsettling thought emerged. Xavier had known about Martha Wilson. He had known how to get her to safety. He had disappeared right before the marshal arrived. This wasn't a random act of kindness. It was a calculated, precise operation. Xavier Zimmerman wasn't just a drifter. He was a hunter, and Joseph Blackburn had been his prey, and she, Olivia Caldwell, had been the bait. A week later, at the preliminary hearing, Olivia faced Blackburn. He glared at her from across the courtroom, his eyes burning with a venomous hatred. But she didn't flinch. She stood tall and told her story, her voice clear and strong. When she presented the forged document next to her father's real signature, a gasp rippled through the room. The judge ordered Blackburn held for trial on a dozen charges. After her testimony, other victims, emboldened by her courage, came forward with their own stories of Blackburn's tyranny. The case against him was now an ironclad fortress. That evening, Martha joined Olivia on the boarding house porch. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. "Will you go back to your father's ranch?" "I don't know," Olivia admitted. "I have no money, no help. The place is probably falling apart." "You can stay here as long as you need," Martha offered. "But something tells me you won't be without help for long." Olivia knew what she meant. "Martha," she said, turning to face the older woman, "who is he? Who is Xavier Zimmerman, really?" Martha sighed, taking a sip of her tea. "Xavier is a man who hunts monsters. He works outside the law when the law isn't enough. Years ago, my family was almost run off our land by a corrupt sheriff. Xavier came to town. He didn't wear a star, but he brought justice all the same. He exposed the sheriff, broke the land grabber's ring, and then he vanished." "So he's not a cowboy," Olivia stated, more than asked. "He's whatever he needs to be to get the job done," Martha said. "He was investigating Blackburn long before you came along. My guess is, when he saw what Blackburn was doing to you, it forced his hand. It made the mission personal." The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Xavier was a ghost, a righteous force moving through the dark corners of the frontier. The next morning, as Olivia was helping in the kitchen, Emma rushed in, her eyes wide. "There's a man on the porch to see you. Says his name is Zimmerman." Olivia's heart stopped. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front door, her legs feeling like lead. There he was, leaning against the rail, looking out at the town. He was clean-shaven now, dressed in new clothes. He looked different, more dangerous. "Xavier," she said. He turned. A slow smile spread across his face. but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Those eyes were still watching, still calculating. "Miss Caldwell, Olivia, I heard you did well at the hearing." "Where were you?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Helena," he said simply, "tying up loose ends." He touched a fresh cut above his eye. Blackburn wasn't working alone. He had powerful partners, investors. They needed to be persuaded to cooperate. Persuaded? A dark look flickered across his face. They understand the situation now. Their testimony will ensure Blackburn never sees the light of day again. He stepped closer. "I heard you got your father's papers back." "Yes," she said, not moving. "And the ranch." "Are you planning on going back?" he asked, his voice low. The question hung in the air between them. This was it, the moment of truth. Was he here to say goodbye, or was he here for something else? "It would be hard to manage alone," she said carefully. He nodded, his gaze intense. "The work I do, it's a lonely life. I move from town to town, from one fire to the next. But lately, I've been thinking about what it might be like to build something instead of just tearing things down." He looked directly into her eyes. "A place like that ranch, it needs more than one person to make it a home." The unspoken offer was deafening. He wasn't just a ghost. He wanted to be a man with a home, with her. "What do you want, Xavier?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. His hand was warm, his touch surprisingly tender. "I want to see what it feels like to stop running," he said. "I want peace, and I think I might find it with you." The front door creaked open, and Martha stood there, a knowing smile on her face. "Xavier Zimmerman, I figured you'd show your face eventually. You're staying for dinner." It wasn't a question. As Xavier offered Olivia his arm and led her into the house, she realized her life had been irrevocably split into two parts: the time before Xavier and the time after. And the time after had just begun. But the war wasn't over. Blackburn was in jail, but his partners were still out there. And men like that didn't just forget. They held grudges. They sought revenge. Xavier hadn't just brought her hope. He had painted a target on her back. In the weeks that followed, Xavier stayed in Mill Creek. He took a room at the boarding house, but spent his days with Olivia. They talked for hours, walking by the creek, sitting on the porch as twilight settled over the valley. She learned about his past, a life spent in the shadows, hunting the predators that plagued the frontier. He wasn't a lawman, not officially. He worked for powerful people back east who wanted the territories civilized, and they hired men like him to solve problems quietly. "Blackburn was a cancer," he told her one evening. "My job was to cut him out. You were never supposed to be a part of it. When I saw you in that stable, everything changed. It stopped being a job." Olivia found herself falling for this complicated, dangerous man. But a shadow of fear always lingered. Blackburn's trial was looming. His wealthy partners had been exposed, but not all of them had been arrested. The threat was still there, a coiled snake waiting to strike. One morning, Marshal Collins brought news. "The court has officially restored your property rights, Miss Caldwell. The ranch is yours again. You can go back whenever you're ready." The joy was immediate, but it was quickly followed by apprehension. Going back meant leaving the relative safety of Mill Creek. It meant being isolated, vulnerable. "I'll go with you," Xavier said, as if reading her mind. "We'll ride out tomorrow. See what needs to be done." The next day, they rode to her family's ranch. It was just as she'd feared. Neglected. Dilapidated. The corral fence was down, the barn door hung by a single hinge. But as she stood on the porch of the dusty, silent house, she didn't feel despair. She felt a flicker of defiance. This was her home. Blackburn had taken it, but he hadn't destroyed it. It's a good structure, Xavier said, his practical eyes surveying the damage. Solid bones. It can be rebuilt. They spent the day making a list of repairs, their conversation easy and natural, falling into a rhythm of we and us. As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch steps. The territorial governor is appointing new deputy marshals, Xavier said, his voice thoughtful. Collins put my name forward. It would mean staying, putting down roots. He turned to her, his expression serious. Olivia, I know this has been a whirlwind, but when I saw you in that stable, I felt like I was the one who was tied up. You freed me. I want to build a life here, with you. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. She had been so sure she would never trust anyone again. But this man, he hadn't just saved her life, he had shown her it was worth living. This ranch was meant for a family, she said softly. It would be a shame for it to be anything less. A slow, genuine smile spread across Xavier's face. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that tasted of dust and sunlight and the promise of a future she had never dared to dream of. They began the hard work of rebuilding. Xavier was a tireless force, repairing the barn, mending fences, his skill with a hammer as sure as his skill with a gun. Friends from Mill Creek came to help. The Wilsons, even Marshal Collins, spent a Sunday helping them raise a new corral. Slowly, painstakingly, the ranch came back to life. By the time autumn painted the hills in fiery colors, Olivia moved back home. Xavier still kept his room in town, but he was at the ranch from sunup to sundown. They planned to marry in the spring, after Blackburn's trial. A week before they were scheduled to leave for Helena, Xavier rode in from town, his face grim. There was a telegram from the marshal. Blackburn tried to escape during a prisoner transfer. He was injured. Badly. Will he live? Olivia asked, her heart pounding. They don't know, Xavier said, but the trial is still on, and we still have to go. The trip to Helena was tense. The city was larger, more imposing than any place Olivia had ever been. Marshal Collins met them at their hotel. Blackburn is alive, he told them, but he's chained to his hospital bed. He'll be in the courtroom under heavy guard. The trial was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed. When Olivia was called to the stand, she had to walk right past Blackburn. He was pale and gaunt, a fresh scar running down the side of his face. His eyes, however, burned with the same unholy fire. He looked at her, and she saw pure, undiluted evil. But she didn't look away. She held his gaze until he, the monster, was the one who flinched. Her testimony was unshakable. For 3 days, witness after witness took the stand, painting a picture of Blackburn's reign of terror. Xavier's testimony about the financial partners in Helena was damning, revealing a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of territorial power. On the 4th day, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in the territorial prison. As they dragged him from the courtroom, Blackburn lunged against his chains, his eyes locking on Olivia. "This isn't over!" he shrieked, his voice a ragged scream. "You think you're safe? I have friends. They won't forget." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "It's over," he whispered. But they both knew it wasn't. Blackburn was a symptom of the disease. The disease itself, the greed, the corruption, was still out there. They returned to the ranch, to the life they were building. Winter came, blanketing the world in a silent, peaceful white. Xavier was officially sworn in as a deputy marshal. They were married in the spring, a simple ceremony under a new arch Xavier built on the hill overlooking the valley. Their friends from Mill Creek were there, celebrating the triumph of love and resilience over darkness. For 5 years they knew peace. They had a son, then a daughter. The ranch prospered. Xavier's work as a marshal kept the worst of the territory's dangers at bay. The memory of Joseph Blackburn faded, a ghost from another lifetime. They heard he had died in prison, and it felt like the final closing of a dark chapter. Then, on a hot August afternoon, a stranger rode into their yard. He was well-dressed, riding an expensive horse. He dismounted and walked toward the porch where Olivia was shelling peas, her children playing at her feet. "Mrs. Zimmerman?" he asked, tipping his hat. His smile was polite, but his eyes were as cold and dead as a winter snake. "I am," Olivia said, a prickle of unease running down her spine. Xavier was in town delivering a prisoner. She was alone. "My name is Marcus Thorne," the man said. "I was a business associate of the late Joseph Blackburn." He let the name hang in the air. "He owed me a considerable amount of money. Money I believe was invested in this very property." The blood drained from Olivia's face. It was happening again. "This property belongs to me," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The court settled that years ago." Thorne's smile widened. "Courts can be mistaken. New evidence can come to light." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "This, for instance, a deed of sale for this ranch, signed by your late father. It predates Blackburn's forged loan documents by a full year. It seems your father, in his desperation, sold his land twice." He held it out to her. It was her father's signature. She would know it anywhere. It was real. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" Thorne said smoothly. "My lawyers in Helena seem to think it's quite possible. In fact, they've already filed for an eviction. You and your family have 30 days to vacate the premises." He had her. After all this time, after everything they had built, the ghost of Joseph Blackburn had reached out from the grave to destroy them. When Xavier returned that evening, Olivia showed him the deed. He examined it under the lamp, his face a grim mask. "It's his signature," he said quietly. "But it doesn't make sense. Your father would never have sold the ranch without telling you." "But he did!" Olivia cried. "It's right there in black and white. We're going to lose everything." "No," Xavier said, his voice hard as steel. He looked up from the paper, and she saw the old light in his eyes, the hunter's light. "We're not. Thorne made a mistake. He came here himself. He showed his face. He's not some ghost in a ledger book. He's a man, and a man can be broken." The next morning, Xavier rode for Helena. "Stay here," he told Olivia. "Lock the doors. Don't talk to anyone." For a week, Olivia and the children lived like prisoners in their own home. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, the old fire of defiance was rekindled. She would not let them take her home. Not again. Xavier returned in the dead of night, slipping into the house like a phantom. He looked exhausted, but his eyes burned with a cold triumph. "Thorne's lawyers have withdrawn the claim," he said, pulling her into his arms. "How?" she gasped. "What did you do?" "I found the man who witnessed your father's signature," Xavier explained, "an old prospector. Thorne thought he was dead. He wasn't. He told me the whole story. Your father didn't sell the ranch. He signed what he thought was a contract for water rights. Thorne and Blackburn switched the papers at the last second." "So the deed is a fraud." "It is," Xavier said. "And the prospector has signed a sworn affidavit saying so. Thorne's case is dead." He paused, a dark look crossing his face. "But that's not all. I paid a visit to Mr. Thorne himself. I explained to him, in very clear terms, that his business interests in Montana were concluded. I suggested he might find the climate back east more agreeable to his health." Olivia looked into her husband's eyes. He was a lawman, yes, but he was also the man who had knelt in a dusty stable and cut her free. He would do whatever it took to protect his family. He would walk through fire. He would become the monster to fight the monsters. And she loved him for it. The next day, as she watched her children playing in the yard, she saw a rider on the horizon. It wasn't the fancy horse of Marcus Thorne. It was the familiar horse of Martha Wilson. Martha rode up to the porch, her face beaming. "I heard the news," Is it true? Is it finally over? It's over, Olivia said, a real, true smile spreading across her face. They had won. Not just the ranch. They had won their lives. They had faced the darkness and refused to be extinguished. The Zimmerman Ranch stood as a testament, not just to hard work, but to a love that had been forged in the crucible of fear and injustice. It was a fortress. It was a sanctuary. It was home. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption on the harsh frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You never know what strange, dark, and mysterious tales we'll uncover next.